this is a project that I did. Let me pull up, hang on. I'll pull up where it is. I think, so this was a website header for an agency called Crew Creative,
Okay.
and it just lives at the top of their website here.
Or
And
like a
it's,
header.
yeah, it's some hands that type on this sort of fantastical keyboard, and then once they've entered in the correct combination, then a new animation appears in this bell jar in the center of the screen.
Yeah.
And I'll show it here. And there's a lot that I could talk about the many facets of this. Is a fairly complicated animation with quite a lot going on, both in the background and their hand animation,
Yeah.
and you have some 3D work going on. But the I think one of the interesting things is that we only had to really animate two versions of this. There's one where like basically there's two combinations that the hands do. The first one we just saw, Money Tree pops up, and then this one is very similar. You'd have to like really study it to, I think, to notice that the hands do something different. But there's only two combinations, so we only had to animate this twice. And then here is the actual project. And then what we did was, well, I say we, but I animated this whole thing. Using essential properties,
Okay.
we were able to create a drop down so that we can just repeat the same comp as many times as we want and just select a different animation. So right now we have a microphone in the middle, and if I select a different item from that drop down, now we're looking at the money tree, or here we have the funnel animation. And at the end, we have this unicorn. And it's all through essential
Essential property.
properties, selecting a different animation that lives within this
Mm.
composition. I was going to quickly run through with a very crude demonstration how this is accomplished. If anybody wants to use essential properties to reuse animation or select specific animations. So in this demo comp, we have three different very simple animations. We have this green block that rotates. We have this blue square that scales up and down. And then we have this red square that just goes side to side. And then when you view it all together, it looks like this. And this is sort of the backbone of how we did this centerpiece here, where a different item appears in the bell jar every time the hands type. We have a microphone, we have a funnel, we have a target. Um, so to actually show you how that works, I can just go ahead and delete that. Yeah. So here we're going to add well, I'll do it from the effect menu, effects, expression controls, drop down menu. And we'll just call this animation selector. And we have this menu here that has item 1, item 2, item 3. You can customize these if you want. Animation 1, oops, animation 2, and animation 3. And now in our control layer here, we have this animation selector dropdown with our animation 1, 2, 3. And all we have to do is, if we look at the opacity property of each of these layers, on the third one, which is the green layer, we can pick whip to the dropdown. And let me see here. Yeah, we pick whip to the dropdown. We can declare a variable var. We'll call this variable name is picker. We'll add dot value at the end. And then we can write a simple if our picker is equal to, in this case, we'll say 3, because we have 3 animations, 1, 2, 3. If our picker is equal to 3, then our value will be 100. And else, if it's not equal to 3, our value will be 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and right click on that opacity and say copy expression only. And I will select the opacity properties of animation 1 and 2, the red square and the blue square. I'm going to hit Control V, paste. And then we'll just go in real quickly. And for animation 2, the blue square will say if the picker equals 2. And for the, this is getting a little bit towards the bottom of my screen. For animation 1, if the picker equals 1, then our value will be 100. So now, each of these, if I expose the opacity, we can see that when our dropdown is on animation 1, only the opacity of animation 1 is 100, and animation 2 and 3, the blue and green squares, the opacity is 0. So we can now, on our drop down, select animation 2. Now we're only seeing the blue square, and animation 3, we're only seeing the green square. And so if I right click at some dead space in the composition, I can say open in Essential Graphics. Now our Essential Graphics panel, I'll drag that over here. This is our Essential Graphics panel for this comp. I can drag that drop-down menu property from our top control layer into our Essential Graphics panel. And now our selector, our drop-down is right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and pre-comp the composition that we've been working on. We've been working in, this is the project panel, we've been working in a composition called O1 EGP for Essential Graphics Panel, EGP demo. So I'm just going to pre-comp that. And we'll just call this master for clarity. So now in our master, we have our O1 EGP demo comp where all of our animations live, but our essential properties, now we can select which of these animations we'd like to reveal. So in this way, this is the same exact way that we did the item in the bell jar. We had a drop down that said, which of the 5 items, 5 animations do you want to show? And it just toggled the opacity between those 5. We only did one hand, and then we, using essential properties, we mirrored it. Let me see if I can find, where was that? Right here. And that controls, let me just make sure that we're, yeah. So why is it not showing me that? Just a second. Sorry about this. There. Okay, so here we have the hand, and I actually have, because there's quite a few, if I unshy these layers, there's quite a few things going on here. So we have like layers upon layers to create all the different kind of nuances in this style. We have these shading on the fingernails and the everything, the drop shadows that are in between the fingers to represent ambient occlusion. We have all that going on. So what I did was, if I shy these so it's easier to look at, what I did was I created a checkbox that turns off anything that's not essential. So if I check that, you can see here, I'll uncheck it again. You can see there's like highlights on the finger and all this gradient work. If I check that, then all that goes away. So it's much faster to render and to work in. And what we've done here is essentially the same sort of thing. We have this base comp, and we didn't do any animation in this comp. We just had all the rigging set up. So here, if I want to, for example, I have an effect on my master control layer for each of the fingers movement. So here we have the pointer. And if I if I increase the value, then the pointer finger starts to bend. And I can go from 0 to, in this case, to 150. When I get to 100, we just have it pressed, it's touching the
yeah.
key. And anything beyond 100 is when it starts to actually bend as
Bend.
it hits the key. So 150 looks like this. And then what we would do is if we open up essential graphics here, let me fly this out. No, hang on, let me. In the essential, so right now I have my screen resolution quite high so that hopefully the screen recording, like the video chat, is a little easier to see what I'm doing. So in the essential properties, we have all of the properties we're going to want to access later, like the elbow rotation, how much does the thumb bend, how much does the pointer finger bend. And so instead of having to duplicate this whole comp with all the layers and do the animation within this comp, we just set up the rigs so that then when we pre-comp this, we can still access all of those properties. So let me just go ahead and show you what I mean. If I pre-comp this hand rig demo, which has maybe 100 layers, I don't know. Now in this master comp, I can go into that pre-comp and my essential properties are still there. And I only have one layer. And then I can animate, we'll just say 150 and 75. Add some quick easing. And now I can animate that finger bending. And the other nice thing about the way that this is set up is that because we have linked the path animation of each finger to a slider, we can use the value graph right here. We can use the value graph instead of the speed graph,
Instead
which
of the
is my
speed graph,
personal
yeah.
preference. Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah. The principle here is exactly the same as what we did for each finger. Or actually, I did, hang on, let me show you. In this hand rig, if I turn this off and solo these layers, this hand rig is essentially a bunch of, each finger is 3 different shapes that are custom paths that have been animated at key moments. So if we look at just the pointer finger, and I reveal all the keyframes, we have 3 paths going on, and I'm going to disable the expressions. So and they're just one frame apart. We have the fully extended up pose. Then the next frame, it is starting to depress. Then the third keyframe is when it actually hits the key. And then the last keyframe is what it looks like when it's bent while hitting the key. And then using expressions, or in this case, I'll show you there are third-party scripts and plugins and extensions that can help you with this. Using expressions, we were able to link these 4 key states to a slider, and then the slider will allow us to enter a numeric value to interpolate between these 4 path position values, which I've prepared a quick demo of here. So here we have a path, this is just one path with a stroke, and we have three different positions. We have the path sort of fully extended, the next one it's sort of bent, and then the last one it's really curled up. And these are just one frame apart. And if we wanted to be able to not only easily animate the interpolation of this, but also reuse it, it would be a little bit tedious and difficult to revise to just stick with path animation. So you can use expressions to do this, but the tool that I recommend if you don't want to get into expression land is called Duic Angela. It used to be Duic Basel.
Yeah.
And in the third tab, the links and constraints, there's a connector feature. So before, I'm going to detach that. I'll just keep it right over here. There's a little bit of a very small amount of setup involved here. We just have a blank, we have a null at the top with no effects. Well, we have a color control actually. The color control I have linked to the color of the stroke on that path, just so we can easily change that. But here, if I go under effect and expression controls and slider, we add a new slider, and I'm just going to put after that, I usually in parentheses put the value range that the slider has to stay within, just so I don't forget.
Yeah, for
So we'll put
organization.
otherwise I'll look at this later and totally forget. So I'll put 0 to 100, and then here in the Duic Angela, the links and constraints tab, next to the connector, there's a gear. We click the gear, we can say, we're going to click the pick control. So before we click that, we'll select the slider that we want to use to animate this path. So now that that slider property is selected, we can say pick control. And then we enter a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 100. And then we select the property that we want to be controlled by that slider. So I'm going to pick the path property and select properties, and it magically, I'll put this
Connects them.
off screen. Yeah, it magically adds all of the expressions that you need to make this work, which usually now I don't use Duic. I just on my K bar, I have a, I'll copy this and I'll show you. I select the path, and then on my K bar, I have this button here, and it adds the code that is needed, and you just need to relink the
expression, the slider.
yeah, the slider exactly. So it's beyond, I guess, the scope of this little talk to go into how that works, but with the Duic code, it works exactly the same. There's just some extra lines of code that kind of could slow you down on a really complicated project. But now that we have clicked the Duic buttons, our slider control here, now between 0 and 100 will animate this path, and that will allow us to be much more precise. It'll allow the easing to be a little bit easier, in my opinion. 45, and we'll just put one more value here, 0, and we'll just select all our keyframes, drag it to the end, hit F9 and go into our graph editor. And now we can really, maybe we do something like this. Maybe like this. And now we're able to accomplish a path animation that would be a little bit more difficult to do if it wasn't locked to, if it was locked to the path property. In the essential graphics panel, I'm going to put that slider. I'll take away all the keyframes. Put that slider that controls the animation, and I'll also put our color control that's linked to the stroke color. That's all in the essential graphics of this this pre-comp, which currently now has no animation. It's just all rigged up. And if I pre-comp, if I put this rig in a new comp, which we'll call master. Here we are in the master. Now in our essential properties, we go 0 to 100, and we'll go to 0. We can F9, and I'll open up. I like to use my preferred interpolation tool is called Flow by Zach Levitt, who he taught the expression session course. So now we have one iteration of this animation, and we just have one layer in this comp. But the cool thing about essential graphics is we can quickly now reuse this animation. We'll make a red one, we'll make a teal one, and we'll just quickly retime this. And so now, for the price of essentially rigging one composition for animation, we can reuse this as many times as we want using essential graphics.